Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Leslie Loveless. I am the CEO and managing partner of Slone Partners. We are a search firm that specializes in supporting life science and healthcare executives. I am joined today by Helen Rosenfeld, and Helen is the executive director of the Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair. It is certainly my pleasure to welcome you here today, Helen, and to learn more about MSEF. I can say that as the mother of a daughter adopted from Guatemala who is in her first year of engineering at Purdue University, I fully appreciate how important it is to give young people the exposure and opportunity to learn more about STEM fields. And so it is my great honor to have this conversation with you today. Helen, I'd love to kick things off by just asking you to please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about MSEF and also share with us what brought you to the organization. What was the draw for you?
Great. Well, thank you for having me, Leslie. It's an honor. I have spent the past 20 some odd years in nonprofit education, usually working on what I like to call the enrichment side of things, the support services that support schools, not as an educator in the classroom. And just found that the Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair and our mission had so much potential to reach more kids, and it particularly timely way as far as engaging kids in the world around them. We're so tied to our phones, and this was a way I saw that students are engaging in the world and actually solving real world problems. So when I joined 6 years ago, I just saw so much opportunity for this organization. To your question about what the Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair does, our mission is to develop future thought leaders in through science and engineering practice. And so the work that we do really reflects the same arc that scientists and engineers take in the real world. Um, and we want students to replicate that experience and take it forward with them.
So that's an amazing initiative that you have there to give students that real world experience. I have learned, I mentioned I have a daughter that is in her first year of engineering. And one of the things that she said to me just this week is that she's so excited about going into year two because it becomes much more real where they actually are doing the hands on work. And so you just mentioned that that is part of your program is giving students the opportunity to really see engineering and science in action and how it is applied, and that is where the passion comes from. So talk to me a little bit more about how you're facilitating this. Like, how does it come alive for the students, and in what way are you able to really engage them so that they have that real world experience?
Yeah. So we work with largely with schools across Massachusetts and their educators, so teachers in the schools who serve as the front line in engaging kids in this work. So it's sort of the narrative arc is that they embed it in their school day for the most part, and they can implement it in any topical area. And I think that's what's so unique about Science Fair. It's not a curriculum as much as it's a framework for learning. So you might have a teacher who embeds it in a chemistry class. It could be part of biology class, but it's this framework of how you take the content you're learning and apply it. So you'll find students starting that process in the fall, asking some question, some big thorny question, ideally about the world or about something that really interests them. Then it might shift as that time goes on into a testable question. What's something they can formalize with that larger issue that they're hoping to address? Then they start to gather data, um, about the question. Ultimately, they're going to have to do some computational thinking around that, and then continue on to a point where they're going to then have to start to display what they're learning. And so teachers take that framework and they embed it in their curriculum, usually during the school day, and that's how students engage in the program.
So, a lot of what you're talking about originates with the partnerships with the teachers. And them displaying passion around science and engineering and creating an environment where students are feeling that enthusiasm for the subject matter. And so tell me a little bit more about the teacher relationship, the teacher partnerships that you have, and how you engage with those teacher partners to create this learning experience that it creates further enthusiasm on the part of the students.
Sure. So we're fortunate to partner with a lot of amazing educators, and they have so much on their plates. And this is meant to be an enhancement, an additional tool that they can use without it being overwhelming. So we work very closely with our teachers. They provide significant input into the process to make sure that we're informed about what works and what doesn't work in the classroom. And again, this idea of it being a framework for learning, that gives enough flexibility to the teachers to use it in a way that they see most applicable in their classrooms without being too instructive, in that they can do it over several months. They could do it over a whole year. They can figure out how to embed it in their curricular structure in a way that they see fit. And then we support the educators by providing as many tools as possible to make that easy. Also, providing professional development, webinars, materials that might enhance that. And ultimately, though, the student project and the student thinking about it is the key piece of it. How do you steward students through that challenging questioning and make it into something that is actually distilled into a question, because it can be very hard to get to that point. Taking that curiosity and narrowing it down to a focusable question, a testable question that the students can use.
So the schools that you work with and the teachers that are involved, are these designated STEM schools that you're partnering with, or is this general education and you're bringing it to the masses, so to speak?
Yeah. We work with nearly 200 schools across Massachusetts, both middle school and high school, and anyone can participate. We sandwich the relationships, if you will. We want to have the buy in of administrators and teachers, and perhaps some STEM enrichment coordinators in those schools as well. So you find that you build an ecosystem of support for this, and people who value the kind of thinking that the process engages students in. And then we're in constant touch with educators throughout the year. We provide, whatever they need. We want to be available. So we have call in hours, we have actual materials that they can download from our website. The idea is that we make it a lighter lift by having as many tools at their disposal as possible, but we're also available for a phone call, because sometimes it's easier to just walk through how to implement it, rather than try to figure it out by wading through some information.
Have you found over the years that the teachers that have got involved in MSEF, that there is a commitment to continue? Like, is it a fulfilling experience for the teachers because of what it brings out in the students, and then they just want to keep participating? Or do you constantly need to go in and bring in more educators? Or do you have these, sort of long-standing relationships that continue on?
Little bit of everything, if I'm being honest. I mean, I think that schools who believe in it have fully embedded this into their work. This is something they do. They recognize students who complete the process. They sort of treat it almost like they do their sports teams by hanging banners on the wall at the end of the year when students have really done well at the science, at the state science fair. Um, those are partners that we love because they truly see how this benefits their students and the creative thinking and sort of forward thinking of STEM students. Um, but like any business model, you have teachers who leave and go to different school districts. You have circumstances where there might be constraints in other curricular objectives. And so there's a little bit of retention and growth strategy embedded in our business model because we have to keep that in mind. There's both the internal to the school decision making, there's also the external factors about what the state is demanding of them at any given time. So it's a little bit of everything, making sure we have sort of partners that really believe in it, trying to onboard and retain new partners as well, but understanding that sometimes things beyond our control happen.
For sure. For sure. So there are lots of STEM programs across the country. This one has been around for a lot of years. If I remember correctly, it's more than 75 years that MSEF has been in place. You've been there for 6 years. I imagine that there are things that have happened over the past 6 years where you've had those moments of, oh, this was a great success. This went really well. And there were probably also moments where you thought, I'd like to do this a little bit differently next year. So talk to me a little bit about what you feel MSEF is doing really well and what sets you apart in the world of STEM programs and where you feel the greatest joy and success at the end of a year.
I love that question. I think the past 6 years have seen so much fluctuation that I think the key word is pivot and adjust and be open minded. I started and we immediately went into the COVID years within a few months of my joining the organization. So we had no option but to rethink our business model. I think more broadly, though, before I get into that, I'd like to share that I think science fair for us has changed in that it is not a competition alone. I think because our name is Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair, there's an assumption that we are all about one big event. And while the state fair, both the middle school and high school state fairs, are capstone occasions for us to celebrate and engage really talented young people, we also sort of work very hard to reframe that as it would not happen without a year-long process to get students engaged and ready to perform at that level at a state fair. And really, if a student never makes it to the state fair, we reach nearly 4,000 students, only about 350 participate at the state fair. That shouldn't be seen as a problem. The fact that they completed a project alone is really the objective, and that they engaged with an audience through the judging process. And I can share more about that. But I think that engagement piece, the fact that they've completed a really large sort of, I'll call it a portfolio project, if you will, that's the part of what we do that we're so proud of. And if they make it to the state fair, if they make it to one of our regional fairs, that's wonderful. That's something to be celebrated. But I think that's been the biggest reframing of our work over the past couple of years, that it should feel accessible to everyone, even if you never make it to the state fair. Um, so I think the past few years have seen a lot of transition, therefore, in how we support our school partners and how we engage students in deeper experiences. So we sort of added on a series of smaller programs, I'll call them, that allow students to connect with each other, because we've learned that so much of what they experience and benefit from is the feeling that they belong in STEM and that they can connect to one another. And when you're going to a number of different fairs, those are very quick turnaround events. And you don't usually have the occasion to get to know the kids at the table next to you as much as you'd like to. And so building that community from what we do as well has been a really exciting change and advancement from what we do. But I think that's where we as a statewide organization think differently about the fair model. It's not just about something that's for the best of the best. It's something that's accessible to everyone, that students, no matter how well they do with their project, should feel like they can pursue later on, and that they could be equally successful with whether they win a prize or not.
Yeah. I love what you're talking about with community because certainly establishing that community and building those connections has to be so critically important for the sustainability of the interest in STEM and really continuing to pursue it. So I love that. That is a really excellent way to view this. Talk to me more about how you define success for MSEF. When you think about the future and what your vision is as the executive director and someone who clearly cares so much about these young people and their experience, describe for us what success looks like from your perspective for MSEF.
Sure. I think that success is often the most ephemeral part of this, which is feeling like you can have a successful academic or professional career in STEM. And I say ephemeral because it's very hard to do longitudinal research to know whether students are actually taking what they've learned during this high school process and staying and sticking to it in STEM. But that's very much our goal, which is not always quantifiable. But anecdotally, we get tremendous feedback from alumni saying that this was a crucial part of their decision to pursue various academic pursuits or higher, um, or professional opportunities in STEM. On a more practical level, our goal is to work with more students and more schools across Massachusetts. So we reach nearly 200 schools right now. That ultimately results in nearly 4,000 students engaging in an independent STEM research project through the science fair model. And our goal is to increase that, reach more schools. We want more students to have access to this. But it also means deepening some of the programming that we do to provide those connective opportunities, like bringing students together outside of the science fair competitive process to have a day of learning or to connect them with mentors in the community. So those are some of the sort of touch points that equal success for us.
You mentioned in your description there about alumni. And so I'm curious about the support that you might get from alumni and how that drives recruitment into the program for students or for the educators that you work with. How important are the alumni to what you're doing and the future of the organization?
So this past year has seen a lot more engagement with alumni than we historically had. And we have an amazing group of young people who are just so enthusiastic about what this meant to them and how they want to give back. So it's still evolving. There are occasions that we have where we do, we hold convenings. We have something called a student symposium where we actually, as part of that day of learning, we bring back our alumni to serve as panelists, to present to our existing student base. And they're the best advocates, right? They're the most enthusiastic, and having near peers who you can relate to is so critical because, as much as we'd like to bring successful scientists and engineers into classrooms or into these environments, the ones that are closest in age are the ones that the students can connect with the best. They're thinking about or have recently thought about the same issues, like how should I make this decision about my college? Or how should I make this decision about the coursework I choose? Or, this is the angle in which I'm approaching my science fair project. Perhaps it would be better off if I look at it from a different perspective. And so our alumni are just so critically helpful in that environment. I'd like to see it be much more extensive. We have a dream of having a database where we could connect students and alumni for any number of questions that they might have. That's sort of a dream and a plan for the future. But for now, on a more tactical level, some of our alumni are even returning to serve as judges at our middle school fairs. You do have to fulfill a certain set of criteria to qualify as a judge. But our higher, sort of the students that are towards graduation or graduate students are perfectly eligible to judge our middle school fairs. And so now we're seeing that full cycle return where they're coming back to judge the fairs that they were students in.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Talk to us a little bit about trends in STEM education and how that is impacting your programming and how you think about the organization and the programs that you offer evolving in the future. I imagine that technology and AI and all of the things that everyone's thinking about and talking about these days plays a factor in there to some extent. But I would love to hear a little bit about what you see as the trends that impact your programming.
The long and short of it is we're seeing a lot more AI projects in this year. We see a lot more computer science projects. The projects students are interested in are definitely reflecting the issues of the hour and the tech, what we see more broadly in industry. And so that's where I see the biggest change. It doesn't necessarily change the way they're learning about it through the science fair process, right? Because we're using these typical scientific practices. That part doesn't change, but the content that the students are interested in is definitely shifting with the times. From our standpoint, something like AI can be a very powerful tool, but it's about also providing the framework for how it should or shouldn't be used when you're doing a science fair project. You can use it to analyze significant data sets that perhaps you wouldn't have been able to do before. But you have to acknowledge what part of that process you were doing the key work on and what you were engaging and using AI for. So much about the science fair process is about documenting all the resources that go into your process. And so that's sort of one of those examples that it both can be part of what's embedded in your science fair project, but also a tool you're using to accomplish a more sophisticated project. So balancing that out, learning as we go. We certainly don't have all the answers, but we're seeing a lot of change based on those evolving tools that are becoming readily available to students. But it also has a huge impact on making science more accessible because students can use a series of materials and tools that they might not have had access to. It's available to everyone. You don't have to have access to a fancy lab, right? You can use these technical tools to achieve really impressive science fair projects.
All of what you're saying ties into the importance of how you defined the organization as a learning framework. It is not a static event or project or curriculum. It is a learning framework that naturally evolves with industry and with tools and with technology. And so it's constantly moving, which I'm sure keeps it very exciting and interesting for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
I want to wrap us up here with asking you one final question about the organization and how you think about what you're doing, and that is perhaps the biggest question of our time here today, and it is, why do you believe what you're doing is so important? When you look back on it or look ahead to what comes next, what is it that keeps you going, keeps you energized? Why is it so important?
When I see students really digging deep to understand big problems in the world, I feel like that's what our goal is. We want students to be curious. And I find that these days, I think we all feel that technology is making it much easier for students to just look at something and not engage with it. It also can have the other effect, right? It is an enabling tool as well. But to get students to be out in the world, asking questions, being curious, and looking for solutions for big issues, I think for us, that's really what science fair is so incredible for and what excites my team, and is sort of embedded in why we do this work. So ultimately, it's about making sure that we continue to ask questions and move forward and feel enabled in that process.
That is amazing to hear. And I can say, coming from the search world where we are working day in and day out with the organizations that are bringing technology to life and applying it in ways that are changing lives, saving lives. I mean, these are the things that your students are working toward. And so I fully appreciate the importance of what you're describing there and how it feeds into what we do, because I can assure you that our clients in life sciences and healthcare very much want to see growth in the types of individuals that are passionate about science and engineering and are coming toward their organization and bringing the solutions that you're talking about and solving big problems. I mean, this is what every client that we work with wants, young, bright minds that are here to solve problems. So, all amazing. And thank you so much for sharing all of this with me today. Uh, Helen, we talked today primarily about the organization, about the mission, about the how it happens. As we go forward in our next session, I'd like to talk more about the student experience and how we can help our audience understand more about a day in the life of a student and what they get out of this and how meaningful it is to them as a young person that is, figuring out what their future is. And so in our next session, we'll talk about that and welcome everyone back to learn more about Massachusetts Science and Engineering Fair. Thank you.
Thanks so much.